Hello, my loyal subjects, and welcome to a brief discussion of the differences between a metallic and a non-metallic object. This might sound like something that's really basic, or it might sound overly technical. Well, actually, this is going to touch our shader graph not at all. Matter of fact, this is the reason why I'm covering it before we actually build our shader graph, is because I actually want to talk about it because it's a conceptual idea that you need to get in your head before we actually start interacting with a physically based shader. This gets a little bit more into the basics of physically based shading, so if you've been using physically based shading for a while, this probably won't be new to you. However, if you're not aware of physically based shading, then you probably should watch this just to learn. Sorry about that, I've been up for like 24 hours, so... or like 20 hours or something, anyway, a while. So if my voice is cracking, I'm sorry. It's just a thing that happens when I have been up for far too long. So anyway, in this case, you can see this looks like a blatantly kind of a red plastic rubber thing, you know, looks quite nice. Now, this is a non-metallic material. Now, pretty much anything that isn't metal is non-metallic, as you would expect, or dielectric, as it is referred to, either conductive or dielectric. Di or dielectric, depending on how you want to pronounce it. However, one thing that you want to definitely think about is the prime differences between these two categories of material. One of them being conductive to electricity, namely metals, and one being non-conductive to electricity in the form of non-metals. So again, and that's not always like the basis of it, but again, think of it as just metals and non-metals, because it's pretty much the general rules here. So, let's talk about the rules for nonmetals. These are pretty simple rules. The majority of your detail is going to be in the diffuse, as you would expect. This is where the majority of your detail goes. This is where kind of you articulate your surface, and also in the roughness. You know, a very smooth surface is going to look like a very different material from an extremely rough one. You know, this looks like clay. This looks like plastic. This looks like kind of a, well, if I drop this down, you can see it kind of looks like a weird plasticky rubber. This looks more like an actual rubber tire or something, like a little rubber toy. So again, just the roughness of the surface can actually make a huge difference in how you actually experience a material. And anyway, however, let's talk about the reflectivity. The reflectivity is the main thing that's going to change between these two different materials. Diffuse and reflectivity. Roughness is completely arbitrary, it'll be the same between them. Anyway, the general rules are this. First of all, very low reflectivity. Most non-metallic materials have a very low reflectivity. If you want some numbers, it's between about 2 to 8%, with most materials falling around 4%. Usually, if you want to fall back to about 4%. On the value slider, this is about 0.22, and if you look over here in your red, green, and blue values, it's 0.04, 0.04, 0.04. Generally what you want. And if you want to save yourself some time, 0.22 is a good value. Just punch that in there into value and you'll get it. So anyway, that's about 4%. Again, not scientifically accurate for everything, but it's a good fallback if you don't know what the actual speculative value for a material is. Next, let's talk about saturation, or how colorful a reflection is. Non-metallic materials cannot tint their reflection. That's not to say that they don't have color in their reflection, it's just that they can't tint it. White light goes in, white light comes out. It might be dimmer, but it has to come out, you know, or it might, again, be black or whatever, but it has to come out without being tinted. Again, this is a broad stroke guideline rule. There are scientific measurements that are slightly off from this because of tiny, tiny flakes of metal or whatever. But again, if you don't know why you're doing it, if you're not messing around with measured data or something, generally speaking, take this saturation value in here, hue, saturation, and value, which I recommend learning how to use this because it's a very, very good artistic way of viewing things. It gives you a lot of control. Take this saturation value, slam it down to 0. If you want to know what it looks like when you don't follow this rule, let me just crank this up. Notice how it starts looking like a cartoon material. It starts looking like something very, very cartoony, and it's just because it's not supposed to do this. Real materials don't do this. and it starts looking very weird, almost like an 80s poster or something. And anyway, 80s music poster. Anyway, so now let's talk about the other side of the coin, metals. Metals are kind of the opposite with a lot of this stuff. Their diffuse has a tendency to be very low to nothing, and generally speaking, I would recommend just turn off diffuse if you want something to look very metallic, just for the sake of clarity. And as you can see, they're very, very reflective. However, they can also tint the reflection. Notice if I make my reflection green, well, maybe not this green, but green, it still looks like a metal. It doesn't suddenly look like a cartoon material. Looks a little bit cartoony because it's very, very bright, but you know, if I dim it down a bit, you can see still looks like a legitimate material, like a legit metal you could run into, especially if you make it rough. You know, if I go in and add some color to it as well, if I give it kind of a more natural orangey color, most naturally occurring metals range in sort of this orangey range, somewhere between yellow and red, and usually not very saturated. That's to say, not near the edge of the color wheel, they're near the center. This is kind of what you'll end up seeing a lot of the time. You can even see it in the background image here. This is an image taken from Tokyo. And as you can see, very nice little metallic surface. It can tint its reflection and has very, very little diffuse. Now, there are a bunch of scientific reasons for this. I don't personally have a deep enough understanding that I feel comfortable talking about them. I know it has to do with electromagnetic fields and the fact that they have one. Metallic objects are conductive and whatnot, but I could not tell you the reason, and I don't want to tell you because I frankly don't know if I have misinformation or not. The information that I do have is shaky enough, I have not verified it, so without further ado, just kind of take these as general guidelines. Now, it's not to say that you are going to measure a value and it's not going to it's always going to measure up with these. Materials are complicated. Sometimes you'll see a metal and it'll be impure, where it actually have a little bit of diffuse in there because maybe it's got some dirt mixed in with that metal or whatever, or charcoal or something like that. So you'll run into elements like that where it's not always going to be cut and dry. But generally speaking, if you want to model material, modeling them as kind of a pure element of whatever they are is generally a good idea. So anyway, this is kind of a neat idea here, worth checking out, and it will hopefully guide you in the process of creating good materials. Just to review, non-metallics are very bright diffuse, very strong and bright diffuse, while metallics, you know, usually with, very bright diffuse with very little reflectivity, as you can see, while metallics are usually very low diffuse and very high reflectivity, or at least very colored reflectivity. So anyway, hope this was informative, hope this helped you understand materials a little bit better. Maybe when you go out in the world, you can actually look at these materials and realize as well that you'll soon realize that this isn't actually cut and dry. You see, there are many materials which are actually layered in this regard. You see, this is a clear coat material. What it is a rough kind of spray paint, like you would see on a lot of cars. A lot of car shops will do this trick, where they'll actually spray paint a very rough, usually metal flakes kind of thing. They'll spray paint a car, as you can see, using something like this, and then what will end up happening is that they'll go in with a clear coat, something that is very smooth and actually transparent so it lets light through, and then they'll layer them on top of one another and get this kind of clear coat look. And clear coat is one of those materials that you see a ton in the industrial world. You'll even see it in the background here with sort of a weird blurred reflection and this sharp one going over. This is how you get a lot of really authentic materials in a world, and it's quite important, actually. So, without further ado, and without further yammering on, realize that these are the basis. This is the basis. This is not necessarily a start and end. It's just a guideline. So a lot of times, I would say don't break the guideline unless you know why you're doing it. Unless you have a physical reason for doing it, try to stick to the guidelines. Again, it's up to you, but it'll keep your materials more consistent. Hopefully this was informative. Have a good day. Sorry for the lack of videos over the last couple days. Been busy. Have a good week, and yeah, I'm signing off. I'm gonna go sleep now.